Between November 15th and 17th, 1986, 16 people were eliminated across Chicago's South Side in what would become known as the Warehouse Massacre. All adults, all connected to a single theft. The method was surgical, handguns at close range, executions in homes and alleys, deaths that were personal and deliberate. The perpetrators weren't rival gangs or drug cartels. They were 5 members of the Castellano family, a father and his 4 sons, moving through the city like shadows, methodically erasing everyone who'd stolen from them. The Chicago Police Department would later call it one of the most calculated gang eliminations in the city's history. But the motive wasn't territory, wasn't a drug deal gone wrong, wasn't even retaliation for violence. It was $85,000 worth of designer goods stolen from their warehouse, and one man's unshakable belief that respect demanded blood. If you have the courage to hear this story, leave your like and subscribe to the channel. But I warn you, this narrative contains extreme violence based on real events. Chicago's South Side sprawled across 77 square miles of urban landscape in 1986, home to approximately 1 million people, most struggling against an economy that had abandoned them decades earlier. The warehouse district sat between 35th and 47th Streets, a maze of industrial buildings where legitimate businesses operated alongside operations the law preferred not to see. November in Chicago meant temperatures dropping to 28 degrees at night, rising to maybe 42 by afternoon. The air smelled like diesel exhaust, fried food from corner stores, and the metallic tang of Lake Michigan wind cutting through concrete canyons. At night, you could hear the L train rattling overhead, distant sirens, and the particular silence that comes when entire neighborhoods learn not to hear gunshots. But 1986 was brutal for working-class Chicago. The steel mills had closed. Manufacturing jobs had fled to the suburbs or disappeared entirely. Unemployment in South Side neighborhoods hovered around 38%. Men who'd expected factory work like their fathers found nothing but locked gates and for lease signs. In that vacuum, alternative economies flourished. Not just drugs, though those were everywhere, but stolen goods, fencing operations, warehouse distribution schemes that existed in the gray area between legal and criminal. For families like the Castellanos, who'd built businesses on the margins of legitimacy, 1986 was both opportunity and minefield. One wrong move, one act of disrespect, could trigger consequences that shocked even hardened detectives. The warehouse district between 35th and 47th Streets had once been Chicago's industrial heart. In the 1940s and 50s, these massive brick buildings had housed meatpacking plants, textile manufacturers, steel distribution centers that employed thousands. By 1986, most stood empty or barely functional, their broken windows covered with plywood, their loading docks crumbling, graffiti covering walls that once displayed company names with pride. The area covered roughly 6 square miles of forgotten urban landscape where legitimate business and street economy intersected in ways the city pretended not to notice. Warehouse 7 sat on 39th Street, a 3-story brick structure built in 1923 that had survived the Depression, 2 world wars, and decades of industrial decline. The building covered 12,000 square feet across 3 floors, connected by a freight elevator that groaned and shuddered, but still worked. The ground floor held loading docks, where trucks could back in under cover. The second floor was storage, endless rows of industrial shelving. The third floor served as offices, though nobody had used them for legitimate paperwork in years. The building's exterior was weathered red brick, windows painted over or broken, a faded sign above the main entrance reading Midwestern Distribution Company in letters that had once been gold. The neighborhood around Warehouse 7 was mostly black and Latino by 1986. Working-class families packed into apartment buildings and two flats that needed repairs their landlords wouldn't make. Corner stores sold cigarettes and lottery tickets. Churches occupied old storefronts, their hand-painted signs promising salvation. The L tracks ran 2 blocks west, the Orange Line carrying people downtown to jobs in offices and hotels, coming home to neighborhoods the city had written off. At night, the warehouse district transformed. Trucks appeared at odd hours. Men moved boxes quickly, efficiently, asking no questions. Money changed hands in denominations that made the legitimate economy look like pocket change. The sound of the place was industrial Chicago, the distant rumble of trains, trucks downshifting on broken pavement, the clang of metal on metal from the few remaining factories, and underneath it all, the bass from car stereos and the shouts of men conducting business in alleys. The smell was urban decay mixed with diesel fuel, rotting garbage from dumpsters, and in winter, the particular scent of snow mixed with exhaust that defined Chicago's cold months. This was where the Castellano family had built their operation, right in the seam between legal and illegal, where goods moved fast and questions weren't asked, where reputation mattered more than contracts, where your word and your willingness to enforce it determined whether you survived. Dominic Castellano was 48 years old in November of 1986, though people said he looked older. He stood 5 feet 11 inches, built thick through the chest and shoulders from decades of loading trucks and moving merchandise. His face was square-jawed and hard, deep, lines carved around his mouth from years of not smiling much. Dark eyes that missed nothing. Hair gone mostly gray and combed straight back in the style his father had worn. A scar ran through his left eyebrow where a piece of metal had caught him working the docks in 1962, 24 years ago, but still visible. His hands were massive, knuckles swollen from old breaks, calluses thick as leather from handling freight since he was 14 years old. Dominic woke every morning at 5:30, made espresso in the kitchen of his bungalow on 31st Street, and sat at the table smoking Marlboros while he read the Tribune. By 6:30 he was at Warehouse 7, checking inventory, reviewing the previous night's deliveries, planning the day's shipments. He didn't talk much in those early hours, just moved through the building like a man inspecting his kingdom, noting everything, forgetting nothing. His routine was sacred, unchanged for 20 years since he'd taken over the business from his father in 1966. He'd married Angela Russo in 1961, right after she graduated high school, and he came back from 2 years in the Army. They'd had 4 boys, Marco born in 1960, Vincent in 1962, Anthony in 1964, and Carlo in 1966. Angela was 46 now, her hands still soft, despite everything, her face still beautiful, despite the worry lines that came from raising 4 sons in a business where violence was always one disrespectful word away. She knew what Dominic did, had always known, and accepted it, the way women in their world accepted such things, as the price of loyalty and security. What Dominic valued most wasn't money, though he'd made plenty. What he valued was respect. His grandfather had come from Sicily in 1903, with nothing but the clothes he wore, and a code that said, "A man protects his family and his reputation above everything else." That code had sustained 3 generations of Castellanos through poverty and discrimination, through wars and depressions, through every betrayal the American dream had served up. The warehouse business, half legitimate distribution and half fencing stolen goods, had kept the family afloat since 1958, when Dominic's father bought Warehouse 7 for $18,000 cash. Marco Castellano was 26 years old that November, the eldest son and heir to everything Dominic had built. He stood 6 feet 2 inches, bigger than his father, 215 pounds of muscle earned in boxing gyms and street fights. His face was handsome in a brutal way, strong jaw, broken nose that hadn't set quite straight, dark eyes that could go from friendly to dead in seconds. He wore his hair short, dressed in leather jackets and dark jeans, gold chain visible at his neck that had belonged to his grandfather. Marco had done 2 years at Stateville for assault in 1979, came out harder and smarter, understanding that violence was a tool to be used precisely, not wildly. Vincent was 24, the businessman of the family. He stood 5 feet 10 inches, leaner than Marco, built like a middleweight fighter, all speed and precision. He handled the books, managed relationships with buyers, negotiated deals with suppliers, both legitimate and otherwise. Vincent had finished 2 years at community college before Dominic pulled him into the business full-time in 1982. He dressed better than his brothers, button-down shirts and slacks, understanding that looking legitimate helped move merchandise. His mind was sharp for numbers, for angles, for seeing 3 moves ahead in any deal. Women liked him because he could talk about things beyond the streets, could take them to restaurants downtown, could pass for legitimate when needed. Anthony was 22, quieter than his older brothers, but just as dangerous when necessary. He stood 6 feet even, solid build, dark hair. He wore a bit longer than family tradition preferred. Anthony handled logistics, coordinated truck routes, managed the drivers and warehouse workers who moved goods through their operation. He had a gift for organization, for making complex shipments appear simple, for knowing exactly where everything was at any moment. He'd never been arrested, stayed in the background, preferred it that way. People underestimated him because he didn't talk much, didn't show off, just worked. That was his advantage. Carlo was the youngest at 20, still figuring out who he was beyond being Dominic Castellano's son. He stood 5 feet 11 inches, same height as his father, still filling out, eager to prove himself. He dressed like his brothers, track jackets and jeans, trying to earn their respect through work and loyalty. Carlo handled street-level operations, collections, minor enforcement, the grunt work every family business required. He was hungry in the way young men get when they're tired of being treated like children, when they want to show they can handle real responsibility. That hunger made him useful, but also dangerous, too quick to escalate, too eager to prove his toughness. The four brothers worked as a unit, raised to understand that family came before everything, before law, before personal desires, before any outside loyalty. Dominic had taught them the code from childhood, sitting at the kitchen table over Sunday dinners telling stories about their grandfather's struggles, about how Castellanos took care of their own and punished anyone who showed disrespect. They'd grown up in the warehouse learning the business, understanding that everything they had came from the reputation Dominic had built and defended for 30 years. November 8th, 1986. A Saturday morning when temperatures hit 34 degrees and gray clouds hung low over the city, Dominic Castellano arrived at Warehouse 7 at 6:45 to find the loading dock doors open and Luis Moreno smoking a cigarette outside looking nervous. Luis was the warehouse manager, 32 years old, had worked for the Castellanos for 6 years, handled day-to-day operations, supervised the crew of 10 workers who moved merchandise through the building. He was reliable, careful, had never given Dominic reason to doubt his loyalty until that morning. "We got a problem," Luis said. His voice shook slightly, cigarette trembling in his hand. Dominic looked at him, said nothing, waited. Luis took a long drag, exhaled smoke into the cold morning air. "The shipment from Thursday night. The designer goods from the Michigan Avenue job. $85,000 worth of leather jackets, handbags, watches. It's gone." Dominic felt something cold settle in his chest. The shipment had arrived Thursday night, November 6th, around 11:30. Designer merchandise stolen from a warehouse in the Loop, high-end stuff that could be fenced quickly for 60 cents on the dollar. $51,000 profit for the Castellanos after paying the thieves their cut. The goods were supposed to stay in Warehouse 7 for 72 hours before being distributed to buyers in Milwaukee, Detroit, and Indianapolis. Simple, routine, the kind of operation they ran monthly without problems. "Gone how?" Dominic asked. His voice was quiet, which anyone who knew him understood meant danger. Luis dropped his cigarette, crushed it under his boot. "Checked inventory this morning. Entire shipment missing. 23 boxes, everything. I called Marco first thing." Dominic walked past Luis into the warehouse, climbed the stairs to the second floor where they stored high-value merchandise. The space where 23 boxes had been stacked Thursday night was empty. Not even packing material left behind. Clean removal, professional, someone who knew exactly what they were looking for and how to move it without leaving evidence. Marco arrived 15 minutes later with Vincent and Anthony. The four Castellano men stood looking at the empty space while Luis explained again, more details this time, voice getting higher as fear took hold. The shipment had been there when he left Thursday night at midnight. When he arrived Saturday morning at 6:30, gone. No signs of forced entry, no broken locks, nothing disturbed. Inside job had to be. Someone with keys, someone who knew the schedule, someone who understood exactly how valuable those 23 boxes were. "Who had access?" Dominic asked. Luis pulled out a notepad with shaking hands, read names. 10 warehouse workers, all trusted, all vetted, all working for the Castellanos for at least 2 years. 4 drivers who'd been in the building Thursday, 2 fence operators who'd come to inspect the merchandise Friday morning, Curtis Brennan and Tommy Valdez, who provided security at night. 18 people total, who'd seen the shipment or knew it was there. Dominic listened. Every name, his face showing nothing, his mind already working through scenarios, probabilities. Who would be stupid enough or desperate enough to steal from him? The Castellano reputation had been built over 30 years on the absolute certainty that stealing from them meant death, not arrest, not negotiation, death. Everyone in their world knew this, had seen examples, understood the rules. Whoever took those 23 boxes had either forgotten or stopped caring about consequences. Dominic spent Saturday afternoon making phone calls from the 3rd floor office, speaking quietly to people who owed him favors or feared him enough to tell the truth. By 6 o'clock that evening, as darkness settled over the warehouse district and temperature dropped to 29 degrees, he had answers. The shipment had been fenced through an operation on the west side, moved Friday morning, already broken down, and distributed to buyers in 3 states. The take was split 16 ways among people who worked in or around Warehouse 7. Luis Moreno had organized it, recruited the others, promised them each $5,000 for their part in the theft. Marco drove Dominic to Luis's apartment on 37th Street, a 2nd-floor walk-up in a building that had needed repairs for 20 years. They knocked at 7:15. Luis answered, saw their faces, tried to close the door. Marco's foot stopped it. They walked inside, calm, methodical. Luis backed into his living room where his wife Maria sat on the couch, watching television with their 2 daughters, ages 7 and 9. The girls looked up at the strangers, went back to their cartoon. "Outside," Dominic said. Luis looked at his wife, saw something in her eyes, fear or maybe relief that the waiting was over. He walked downstairs with Dominic and Marco, stood on the sidewalk under a street light that flickered, his breath visible in the cold air. He didn't deny it, didn't make excuses, just said the truth. He'd organized the theft because he was tired of watching the Castellanos make millions while he earned $400 a week managing their warehouse. Because his daughters needed things. Because his wife wanted a house. Because he'd calculated the risk and decided 16 people splitting $85,000 could disappear into the city before the Castellanos figured it out. "You were wrong," Dominic said. Luis nodded, understanding what was coming, understanding there was no negotiation possible. "Give me the names, all 16. Luis pulled a folded paper from his jacket pocket, had it ready, knowing this moment would arrive. Handed it to Dominic, who read it under the streetlight. 10 warehouse workers, the same ones Luis had mentioned that morning. Curtis Brennan and Tommy Valdez, the night security. 3 fence operators who'd helped move the merchandise. And Luis's cousin, Rafael Moreno, who'd provided the contacts to sell everything quickly. "You involved your own family," Dominic said. Not a question, a statement of fact that carried its own judgment. Luis looked at the ground. Rafael needed money. His kids got cancer, medical bills. Dominic folded the paper, put it in his coat pocket. "You know what happens now." Luis raised his eyes, met Dominic's gaze. "Do it quick. Don't make Maria watch. Don't let my daughters see." Dominic nodded once. That much he could give. That small mercy. They left Luis standing on the sidewalk, drove back to Warehouse 7 where Vincent and Anthony were waiting. Carlo arrived at 8 o'clock. The 5 Castellano men sat in the third-floor office, door closed, single lamp providing light. Dominic laid the paper on the desk, 16 names written in Luis's careful handwriting. They took what was ours, Dominic said. All of them knew the rules, knew what stealing from us means. We handled this the way it's always been handled. The office was cold, despite the space heater running in the corner. Outside, wind rattled the windows, temperature dropping toward 25 degrees. The 5 Castellano men looked at the list. 16 names, 16 people who'd crossed a line that everyone in their world knew existed. Marco spoke first. We do them all. No exceptions. You leave one alive, they talk, they testify, they bring the whole thing down. Vincent, always the careful one, asked the question that had to be asked. 16 bodies in how much time? That's going to bring heat we've never seen. FBI, not just Chicago cops. Dominic lit a cigarette, exhaled smoke toward the ceiling stained yellow from decades of tobacco. We do it fast. 3 nights, maybe 4. Make it look like a gang war, drug dispute, anything but what it really is. We spread them across the South Side, different methods, different locations. By the time police figure out the pattern, it's done. Anthony, quiet until now, said what they were all thinking. Some of these guys got families, kids. Dominic looked at his son. Should have thought about that before they stole from us. Carlo, eager to prove himself, leaned forward. I can handle 3, 4 myself. Show you I'm ready for real work. Marco shook his head. Nobody works alone. We go in pairs, we watch each other's backs, we make sure it's done clean. Vincent pulled a Chicago map from the desk drawer, spread it across the surface. Using a pencil, he began marking addresses. Luis Moreno lived at 37th and Wallace. Curtis Brennan had an apartment near 45th and Ashland. The warehouse workers were scattered across the South Side from 31st to 51st Streets. The fence operators worked out of locations in different neighborhoods. Rafael Moreno lived in Pilsen, west of the warehouse district. We start with the workers, Dominic said. The guys who actually moved the boxes, they're expecting trouble, might run if we wait too long. He assigned targets, methodical, strategic. Marco and Vincent would take the first 3 warehouse workers tomorrow night, Sunday, November 9th. Anthony and Carlo would handle 2 more on the same night. Dominic would personally deal with Luis Moreno. Monday night, they'd continue working through the list, eliminating anyone who'd touched their merchandise or helped fence it. By Wednesday, the job would be finished. They spent 2 hours planning, discussing approach routes, methods, timing. The rule was simple. Quick, quiet, minimal witnesses. Handguns preferred, close range, nothing dramatic. Make it look like street crime, robbery gone wrong, personal disputes. The police wouldn't dig too deep, not on the South Side, where bodies appeared regularly and investigations stalled because nobody talked. Angela Castellano knocked on the door at 10:30, brought coffee and sandwiches. She didn't ask what they were discussing, didn't need to. She'd been married to Dominic for 25 years, had raised 4 sons in this world, understood that some conversations happened behind closed doors and the only acceptable response was support and silence. After she left, Dominic looked at his sons, saw boys he'd taught to ride bikes and men who were about to commit murder. This is who we are. he said. "This is what our name means. You protect what's yours. You punish anyone who takes it. No courts, no police, no outside authority, just us, taking care of our own." The sons nodded, accepting the weight of what was coming, understanding they were crossing a threshold that would define the rest of their lives. Sunday, November 9th, 1986. Temperature at 8 o'clock in the evening was 27 degrees. Wind gusting to 15 miles per hour, making it feel like 18. The sky was clear, stars visible between streetlights. Moon a thin crescent providing almost no illumination. Marco and Vincent sat in Marco's 1984 Buick Regal, parked on 36th Street, watching the apartment building where Dennis Murphy lived. Dennis was 29 years old, had worked at Warehouse 7 for 3 years, loading and unloading trucks, helping inventory high-value shipments. He lived alone, third-floor apartment, worked nights at a restaurant washing dishes to supplement his warehouse income. They'd been watching since 7:30. Lights on in his apartment, television flickering blue through thin curtains. Sound of a basketball game. Bulls versus Pistons. Announcer's voice carrying through the November cold. At 8:45, the light went off. Marco and Vincent waited. 10 minutes later, Dennis emerged from the building's front door, wearing a Bulls jacket and jeans, heading toward the L station 6 blocks away for his night shift at the restaurant. He never made it. They caught him 2 blocks from his apartment, alley between 36th and 37th, dark enough that nobody would see clearly, close enough to his building that it looked like random street crime. Marco called his name. Dennis turned, recognized them, understood immediately. He didn't run, didn't scream, just raised his hands. "I'll give it back, every dollar. I swear to God." Vincent stepped close. Too late for that. The shot was quiet, .22 caliber pistol, sound muffled by wind and distance. Dennis fell against the brick wall, slid down, left a streak of blood on mortar that had held that building together since 1928. Marco and Vincent walked back to their car, calm, unhurried, 2 men finishing a job. At the same time, 4 miles south, Anthony and Carlo were approaching the house where Robert Chen lived. Robert was 34, had worked at the warehouse for 4 years, drove trucks occasionally, handled inventory regularly. He was married, had a 6-year-old son, lived in a small house on 43rd Street that he rented for $300 a month. The lights were on, family having dinner, the smell of cooking coming through the windows. Anthony and Carlo waited in the shadows across the street until 9:15, when Robert came outside to smoke a cigarette on his front porch, his ritual after dinner every night. Carlo wanted to do it, prove himself. Anthony let him. They crossed the street together. Robert saw them coming, dropped his cigarette, started to turn back toward his front door. Carlo's first shot hit him in the shoulder, spun him around. The second shot went through his chest. Robert Chen fell on his porch, eyes open, staring at his front door where his wife and son would find him in approximately 3 minutes, when they wondered why he hadn't come back inside. Anthony and Carlo were already gone, walking quickly but not running, getting into Carlo's 1979 Camaro parked 2 blocks away. At exactly 9:30, Dominic Castellano knocked on Luis Moreno's door. Maria answered, saw him standing there, knew. She didn't scream, didn't cry, just stepped aside. Luis sat at the kitchen table, his two daughters already in bed, sleeping or pretending to sleep. He stood when Dominic entered. "Outside," Dominic said, same as before. They walked downstairs, stood in the cold November night under the same flickering streetlight. "You have anything to say?" Dominic asked. Luis shook his head. "Just make sure Maria and the girls are okay. They didn't know, didn't have anything to do with it." Dominic nodded. "Your wife gets $2,000. Not from me. From people who owe me. Enough to bury you and get her started somewhere else." Luis closed his eyes, grateful for that small kindness. The shot came quick, professional, exactly what Luis had asked for. He fell on the sidewalk where he'd stood, and Dominic walked away without looking back. Monday, November 10th. The bodies were found throughout the morning. Dennis Murphy discovered by a homeless man searching for cans in the alley at 6:15, called in by a woman walking to work who saw the police activity. Robert Chen found by his wife at 9:20 the previous night. Chicago police at the scene within minutes. Neighbors reporting they'd heard shots, but assumed it was fireworks or a car backfiring. Luis Moreno found by a delivery driver at 7 o'clock Monday morning, lying on the sidewalk in front of his building in a pool of blood that had frozen during the night. Chicago police homicide got all three cases. Different detectives initially, different parts of the South Side, no immediate connection. Dennis Murphy looked like random robbery. Wallet missing, though that had been taken by the homeless man who found him, not the killers. Robert Chen appeared to be targeted. Shot on his own porch, possibly gang-related, though he had no gang affiliations anyone could find. Luis Moreno was obvious execution, single shot, professional, someone sending a message. By Monday afternoon, 3 separate investigations were underway, none of them talking to each other yet. That night the killing continued. Marco and Vincent took Jimmy Delgado at his apartment on 40th Street, caught him coming home from his girlfriend's place at 11:30, walked him into the alley behind his building, 2 shots, left him there. Anthony and Carlo handled Michael Washington and Terry Brooks together, both warehouse workers who shared an apartment on 46th, caught them outside a bar at midnight, drinking, celebrating their share of the theft without understanding they were already dead men. 4 shots total. Both bodies left in the parking lot. Witnesses saying they saw 2 men, but couldn't describe them, wouldn't describe them, even if they could. Curtis Brennan, the night security guard, was harder. He'd figured out something was wrong when he heard about the bodies Monday afternoon, called his cousin who worked South Side streets, got word that the Castellanos were cleaning house. Curtis ran, grabbed his girlfriend and his son from a previous marriage, drove to Gary, Indiana, thought distance would save him. Vincent found him Tuesday morning through contacts who knew people in Gary, made phone calls, tracked Curtis to a motel on 5th Avenue. Vincent drove there alone, knocked on the door at 2 o'clock Tuesday afternoon. Curtis opened it thinking it was housekeeping, saw Vincent. Tried to slam the door. Vincent pushed through. His girlfriend screaming, his 10-year-old son crying. Vincent looked at the boy, thought about the rules, thought about his own childhood, made a choice. Take your son and walk outside. Don't come back for 10 minutes. Your girlfriend stays. The woman was 26, worked at a grocery store, knew about Curtis's warehouse job, but nothing about the theft. Vincent questioned her, believed her, Let her live. Curtis, he shot in the motel bathroom, quick and professional, told the girlfriend to take the boy and disappear, gave her $500 for bus tickets, told her if she talked to police, she'd join Curtis. She took the money, took the boy, was on a Greyhound to Tennessee by 4 o'clock, would never speak about what she'd seen. By Tuesday night, 8 people were dead. The fence operators were next. Rafael Diaz worked out of a pawn shop on Halstead, handled stolen merchandise, had processed the Castellano shipment Friday morning for $15,000 cash, kept 5 for himself, passed 10 to his partners. Marco walked into the shop at 3 o'clock Tuesday afternoon. Only customer, shot Rafael behind the counter, took the cash from the register to make it look like robbery, walked out calm as a man buying a watch. Tuesday night, November 11th, the Castellano brothers met at Warehouse 7 to review progress. 8 dead in 3 days, 8 more to go. But complications had emerged. The kind that happen when you eliminate 16 people who have lives and connections beyond the crime they committed. Tommy Valdez, the other night security guard, lived with his sister Carmen and her 3 children. Carmen worked 2 jobs, depended on Tommy's income to help with rent. She knew he worked security, knew nothing about the theft. When Anthony and Carlo arrived at their apartment on 44th Street at 10 o'clock Tuesday night, they found Tommy watching television with his nephews, ages 8, 6, and 4. The plan had been simple. Get Tommy outside, handle it quietly, leave Carmen and the kids untouched. But Tommy saw them through the window, recognized Carlo from the warehouse, understood immediately. He grabbed his nephews, pushed them into the bedroom, told Carmen to call police, pulled a gun he kept under the couch cushion. The first shot went through the apartment window, missed Carlo by 6 inches. The second shot hit Anthony in the shoulder, spun him around. Carlo returned fire. 3 shots through the window, all 3 hitting Tommy in the chest. He fell in front of the television where his nephews had been sitting 30 seconds earlier, blood spreading across the carpet their mother had bought at a thrift store 3 months ago. Carmen screamed, grabbed her children, barricaded herself in the bedroom while Anthony and Carlo fled. Police arrived 4 minutes later. Found Tommy dead, found Carmen hysterical, found 3 children who'd watched their uncle get shot in their living room. The detectives taking the report noted the names Anthony and Carlo mentioned by witnesses, noted the warehouse connection, started making calls to other detectives working similar cases on the South Side. The pattern was beginning to emerge. The fence operators proved easier. Marcus Williams and Jerome Tucker worked together, ran a chop shop operation on 51st Street that also moved stolen goods. They'd processed some of the designer merchandise, made $8,000 between them. Dominic and Marco found them Wednesday morning at the shop, both working on a stolen Cadillac, radio playing, completely unaware the Castellanos had tracked them. 2 shots each, quick and professional. Bodies left in the garage, where police would find them Thursday morning along with evidence of 15 other crimes. Rafael Moreno, Luis's cousin, was the ethical problem. He'd organized the fencing, set up the buyers, made the theft possible. But his 5-year-old daughter had leukemia, medical bills totaling $70,000, insurance that covered almost nothing. Luis had told Dominic this, pleaded for his cousin, said Rafael had acted out of desperation, not greed. Dominic had listened, said nothing, put Rafael on the list anyway. Vincent found him Wednesday afternoon at the hospital where his daughter was receiving treatment. Sat with him in the cafeteria, two men drinking coffee, while a child fought for her life 3 floors above them. "You knew what you were doing," Vincent said. Raphael didn't deny it, just asked the same question Luis had asked. "Make it quick. Don't do it here, where my daughter might see." Vincent nodded, followed Raphael to the parking garage, shot him between 2 minivans, left him there, walked back to his car thinking about lines that shouldn't be crossed but were crossed anyway when money and family and desperation collided. 13 dead now, 3 more to go. But the Chicago police were connecting cases, detectives comparing notes, seeing patterns, understanding this wasn't random street violence but systematic elimination. The investigation was accelerating, racing against the Castellanos' timeline, both sides knowing that whoever finished first would determine how this story ended. Wednesday night, November 12th, 1986. Temperature had dropped to 22 degrees, cold enough that breath froze in the air, cold enough that the few people still on South Side streets moved quickly, heads down, wanting only to get inside. The last 3 names on Dominic's list were warehouse workers who'd helped move the boxes, men who'd worked for him for years, who'd sat at the same table during lunch breaks, who'd taken his money every Friday and smiled and called him sir. Patrick Moore, Deshaun Williams, and Antonio Garcia. All 3 had families. All 3 had reasons they'd given themselves for stealing $85,000 worth of merchandise. None of those reasons would matter by midnight. Patrick Moore lived in a basement apartment on 39th Street, single father raising a 9-year-old daughter named Michelle after his wife had left 2 years earlier. He worked the warehouse day shift, picked up his daughter from school at 3:30 every afternoon, helped her with homework at the kitchen table, made dinner, watched television together before bed at 8:30. Marco and Vincent found him there Wednesday evening at 9 o'clock, after Michelle was asleep in the bedroom. They knocked. Patrick looked through the peephole, saw them, knew his choices had run out. He opened the door slowly, stepped into the hallway, pulled it closed behind him so the sound wouldn't wake his daughter. "Where's Michelle? Going to go?" Patrick asked. His voice was steady, accepting. Marco said nothing. Vincent looked at the closed door, thought about a 9-year-old girl sleeping 20 feet away whose father wouldn't be there when she woke up tomorrow morning. "Your sister lives in Evanston. We already called her. She's coming to get Michelle tomorrow morning." Patrick's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you." Those were his last words. The shot was quiet, a .22 caliber with a suppressor Marco had acquired specifically for jobs requiring discretion. Patrick fell in the hallway outside his apartment, and Marco and Vincent were gone before his body stopped moving. Deshaun Williams was 31, lived with his girlfriend Tamara and her mother in a 2-flat on 47th Street. He had no children, no major debts, no desperate reason for stealing except wanting more than a warehouse worker's salary could provide. He'd taken his $5,000 cut and bought a used car, a 1978 Oldsmobile Delta 88. He'd been driving around the neighborhood, showing off, not understanding that displays of sudden wealth were suicide in a world where everyone watched everyone else. Anthony and Carlo found him at a girlfriend's apartment Wednesday night. Different girlfriend than Tamara, a woman named Crystal who lived on 52nd Street. They waited outside until Deshaun came out at 11:15, jacket unzipped, despite the cold gold chain visible at his neck that was new, paid for with Castellano money. Carlo walked up behind him, called his name. Deshawn turned, saw who it was, tried to run. He made it 15 feet before Carlo's first shot hit him in the back, dropped him to the pavement. The second shot was unnecessary, but Carlo fired it anyway, proving something to himself or his brothers or his father. Deshawn Williams died on the sidewalk outside his girlfriend's apartment, the new gold chain still around his neck, the car he'd bought with stolen money parked 3 spaces away. Antonio Garcia was the last warehouse worker, but he'd disappeared. Vincent had checked his apartment Tuesday morning, found it empty, called his phone number, got no answer. Garcia's girlfriend said he'd left Monday afternoon, said he had family business in Texas, would be back in a week. She was lying, protecting him, or maybe believing him. Either way, Antonio understood what was coming and had run. Dominic made calls Wednesday afternoon, reached people in Houston where Antonio's cousin lived, got confirmation that Antonio had arrived there Tuesday night, was staying in a house in the 5th Ward, thought distance would save him. Let him go, Vincent suggested Wednesday evening. 15 out of 16 sends the message. One survivor isn't worth the risk of going to Texas. Dominic looked at his son, understanding the logic but rejecting it. We leave him alive. He talks. Maybe not to police, but to people on the street. He says the Castellanos don't finish what they start. The whole point falls apart. Marco nodded agreement. I'll go to Houston, be back by Friday. Dominic shook his head. We all go. Friday morning. We finish this right. Thursday, November 13th. Chicago Police Homicide Division was drowning in bodies and connections they couldn't ignore anymore. 15 murders in 5 days across the South Side. Every victim connected to warehouse work or fencing operations. Every killing professional and deliberate. The pattern was obvious now to anyone paying attention. Detective Raymond Williams, 43 years old, 21 years with Chicago PD, was the one who finally pulled it all together. He'd caught the Luis Moreno case Monday morning, spent 3 days interviewing neighbors, checking backgrounds, following leads that went nowhere until Wednesday afternoon, when another detective mentioned a warehouse worker named Dennis Murphy found in an alley Sunday night. Williams pulled the Murphy file, saw the warehouse connection, started making phone calls to every detective who'd caught a South Side murder since Sunday. By Thursday morning, he had 15 cases on his desk, all unsolved, all professional executions, all connected to people who worked at or around warehouses in the 35th to 51st Street corridor. He spread the crime scene photos across his desk, looked at faces of people who'd been alive 5 days ago, tried to see the pattern beyond the obvious. What connected 15 people beyond warehouse work? What made someone decide they all needed to die within 1 week? His partner, Detective Sarah Chen, 36 years old, 8 years in homicide, made the connection Williams had missed. Look at the dates. They all worked at the same place. Warehouse 7 on 39th Street, owned by Midwestern Distribution Company. She pulled the business registration, found the owner's name. Dominic Castellano. Williams ran the name, found a file. Dominic Castellano, 48 years old, suspected fence operator, warehouse owner since 1966, investigated multiple times, never charged. Father of 4 sons, Marco, Vincent, Anthony, and Carlo. All four had arrest records, minor charges mostly, assault, receiving stolen property, nothing major but enough to establish pattern. "This is a cleaning," Williams said. "Someone stole from Castellano. He's eliminating everyone involved." Chen pulled phone records for Warehouse 7, found calls to 10 of the victims in the weeks before they died, found delivery records showing trucks driven by 3 of the victims, found employment records listing 12 victims as current or former warehouse workers. "We need to talk to Castellano now, before he finishes whatever list he's working from." They drove to Warehouse 7 Thursday afternoon, found it locked, lights off, no vehicles in the parking area. Williams knocked, got no answer. They tried Dominic's home address on 31st Street, found Angela Castellano there alone, sitting in the kitchen drinking coffee. She was polite, calm, said her husband was traveling on business, would be back Friday, said her sons were with him. Wouldn't say where, wouldn't provide contact information, suggested the detectives speak with their attorney if they had questions. Williams knew they were gone, understood they were finishing whatever job they'd started. "When your husband comes back, tell him we need to talk. Tell him it's about 15 murders we're connecting to his warehouse." Angela's face showed nothing. "My husband runs a legitimate business, detective. Whatever you think you know, you're mistaken." But her hands shook slightly when she lifted her coffee cup, and Williams saw fear there, not for herself, but for her family, understanding that whatever had been set in motion was approaching its conclusion. Back at the station, Williams filed for warrants, arrest warrants for all 5 Castellanos, search warrants for the warehouse and their homes. He knew the warrants would be approved by Friday morning, knew that if the Castellanos returned to Chicago, they'd be arrested immediately. What he didn't know was whether they'd run or face what was coming. Thursday night, families of the victims started connecting with each other, comparing stories, realizing their losses were part of something larger. Patrick Moore's sister arrived from Evanston to collect Michelle, found her nephew dead in the hallway, found a 9-year-old girl who'd woken Thursday morning calling for a father who would never answer. Carmen Valdez, Tommy's sister, spoke to reporters outside her apartment, 3 children behind her, all of them traumatized. "They came to our home. They shot my brother in front of his nephews. What kind of people do that?" The news coverage expanded Thursday night. Local stations picking up the story. South Side Massacre becoming the headline. Pressure building on Chicago PD to make arrests, to stop whoever was systematically eliminating people across 6 square miles of urban landscape. Raymond Williams had grown up on the South Side, Bronzeville neighborhood, son of a postal worker and a school teacher who'd raised him to believe in law and order, in the system's ability to deliver justice. He'd joined Chicago PD in 1965 at age 22, worked patrol for 7 years before making detective in 1972. 21 years on the job had taught him that justice was complicated, that the law didn't always reach the places it needed to go, that some communities police themselves according to codes older than any statute book. But 15 murders in 5 days exceeded any code he understood, violated every principle he'd built his career on. Thursday night, he stayed at the station until midnight, going through files, building the case against the Castellanos. The evidence was circumstantial but strong. Every victim connected to Warehouse 7. The timeline starting right after shipment worth $85,000 disappeared from that same warehouse. witnesses placing Castellano family members near several crime scenes. The pattern too precise to be coincidence, too professional to be gang violence. Williams had seen organized crime hits before, had investigated mob killings and gang executions, but this was different. This was family, father and sons, working together, eliminating threats to their business with the efficiency of a military operation. His wife Janet called at 11:30, asked when he was coming home. Williams looked at the photos spread across his desk. 15 faces, 15 families destroyed. I don't know, this case is bigger than anything I've worked. These people are still out there, still killing. Janet was quiet for a moment. Just come home safe, Ray. Whatever you're chasing, it's not worth your life. But Williams knew it was worth something. Had to be worth something, or 15 people had died for nothing, and their families would never see justice. He drove home at midnight, slept 4 hours, was back at the station at 6 o'clock Friday morning when the warrants came through. Arrest warrants for Dominic, Marco, Vincent, Anthony, and Carlo Castellano. 15 counts of first-degree murder each. Search warrants for Warehouse 7, for Dominic's home, for the brothers' apartments. The raid happened at 8 o'clock Friday morning. 20 Chicago police officers, 4 detectives, tactical team, in full gear, expecting resistance. They hit Warehouse 7 first, found it empty except for legitimate inventory, found business records showing standard distribution operations, found nothing connecting the building to the murders except employment records for 12 victims. Dominic's house was clean, family photos on the walls. Angela Castellano Cooperative showed them every room, provided access to financial records, said again that her husband and sons were traveling, expected back Friday evening. The brothers' apartments yielded nothing useful, no weapons, no evidence, no indication anyone had been there since early in the week. Williams stood in Warehouse 7 at 10 o'clock Friday morning, looking at shelving and boxes and the ordinary machinery of a business that had operated for 28 years. He understood what had happened, could see it clearly now. The Castellanos had planned this, had known they'd be investigated, had cleaned every location before they started killing, had left nothing physical connecting them to the crimes. The case would depend on witnesses, on forensics, on building circumstantial evidence into something a jury would believe. It was possible, Williams thought, but difficult. And it assumed the Castellanos would return to Chicago, would face arrest, would participate in the legal process. Men who'd killed 15 people in 5 days might have different plans. At 11:15 Friday morning, Williams got a call from Houston Police Department. A detective named Martinez reported that a man matching Dominic Castellano's description had been seen in the 5th Ward Thursday night accompanied by 4 younger men, asking questions about someone named Antonio Garcia. Houston PD had located Garcia Friday morning, found him staying with his cousin, placed him in protective custody, was arranging transport back to Chicago to testify. "Tell them to hurry," Williams said. "The Castellanos might try something before you can move him." Friday, November 14th, 1986. The Castellano family returned to Chicago on a Greyhound bus that arrived at the station on Harrison Street at 4:30 in the afternoon. They'd driven to Houston Thursday morning, spent 20 hours searching for Antonio Garcia, came within 3 blocks of finding him, before Houston police moved him to a safe house. Dominic had made the decision Thursday night. Return to Chicago, face whatever was coming. Don't run like criminals. We did what honor demanded, he'd told his sons at a truck stop outside Memphis where they'd stopped for coffee at 2 o'clock Friday morning. Now we face the consequences like men. They took a taxi from the bus station to Warehouse 7, arrived at 5:15. Just as the sun was setting over the south side, sky turning orange and purple, temperature dropping toward 28 degrees. Williams was there waiting with 12 officers, had positioned them around the building at 4 o'clock, had known somehow that the Castellanos would come back, would walk into arrest rather than spend their lives running. The taxi pulled up to the front entrance. Dominic got out first, saw the police, saw Williams standing by an unmarked car. He turned to his sons, still in the taxi. Don't make this harder. We knew this was coming. Marco, Vincent, Anthony, and Carlo climbed out, stood beside their father in a line facing the police, hands visible, making no move toward weapons they weren't carrying. Williams approached slowly, hand near his service weapon but not drawing it. Dominic Castellano, you're under arrest for the murder of Luis Moreno, Dennis Murphy, Robert Chen. He read all 15 names, the litany taking 90 seconds. Each name a life ended, each name a family destroyed. When he finished, Dominic nodded once. We understand the charges. Williams pulled handcuffs from his belt. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. As Williams cuffed Dominic, other officers moved to the sons, cuffing each one. Reading rights, professional, and careful, Marco submitted without resistance. Vincent kept his face expressionless. Anthony looked at the warehouse, at the building his grandfather had bought 28 years earlier, understanding he'd probably never see it again. Carlo, the youngest, looked scared for the first time. Reality settling on him that this wasn't a movie, wasn't a story, was his actual life, ending at age 20. They were loaded into separate vehicles, standard procedure for suspects who might coordinate stories if allowed to communicate. As Williams opened the back door of his car for Dominic, the older man spoke quietly. Those 16 people stole from my family. We did what needed doing. 15, Williams corrected. Antonio Garcia is alive, in protective custody, going to testify against you. Dominic's face changed, just a flicker. Disappointment or maybe respect that one target had escaped. 15 then. Point stands. They took what was ours, broke the code everyone in this world lives by. We couldn't let that pass. Williams looked at this man who'd ordered 15 executions to protect $85,000 and his reputation. You could have called police, reported the theft, let the law handle it. Dominic smiled without humor. You don't understand our world, detective. The law doesn't protect people like us. We protect ourselves. Williams closed the car door, drove Dominic to the station, processed him through booking, fingerprints, and photos and formal charging, the machinery of justice turning now. Slow, but inevitable. By 6 o'clock Friday evening, all 5 Castellanos were in custody, being held without bail, charged with 15 counts of first-degree murder each. Angela Castellano hired Martin Feldman, the best criminal defense attorney in Chicago, a man who'd won cases everyone thought were unwinnable, who understood jury psychology and media management and how to turn public opinion. But even Feldman, meeting with his clients Friday night at Cook County Jail, understood this case was nearly impossible. 15 bodies, clear pattern, motive established, means and opportunity proven. The only question was whether Antonio Garcia would testify, whether his account of the theft and the Castellanos' response would provide the final piece prosecutors needed for conviction. Saturday morning, newspapers across Chicago ran the story with photos of all 5 Castellanos being led into jail, headlines screaming, "Family of killers arrested," and "Southside Massacre solved." The public reaction was divided, some saying the Castellanos were animals who deserved death, others quietly acknowledging that in certain communities, certain codes still mattered more than written law, that maybe the 16 thieves had known exactly what they were risking when they stole from a man like Dominic Castellano. The trial of the United States versus Dominic Castellano, Marco Castellano, Vincent Castellano, Anthony Castellano, and Carlo Castellano began on March 23, 1987, in the United States District Court for the Northern District of Illinois. The venue had been moved to federal court after prosecutors filed RICO charges, racketeering influenced and corrupt organizations, arguing the Castellano family operated as a criminal enterprise. The courtroom was packed every day. Families of victims sitting on one side, supporters of the Castellanos on the other, media filling the back rows, reporters from Tribune, Sun-Times, and 3 television stations covering every moment. Judge Margaret Patterson presided, 61 years old, appointed to the federal bench in 1979, known for running a strict courtroom and handing down harsh sentences. The prosecution team was led by Assistant United States Attorney David Chen, 38 years old, ambitious, methodical, who'd built his career on organized crime cases. The defense was Martin Feldman and his team of 4 associates, all experienced, all understanding they were fighting nearly impossible odds. Jury selection took 3 weeks. Finding 12 people who hadn't heard about the Southside Massacre was impossible. Finding 12 who could set aside what they'd heard and judge only on evidence presented in court was the challenge. Eventually, they seated 7 men and 5 women, ages ranging from 26 to 68, mix of races and backgrounds that reflected Chicago's diversity. Chen's opening statement was devastating. He laid out the timeline, methodical and precise. November 8th, the theft of $85,000 in merchandise from Warehouse 7. November 9th through 14th, 15 people murdered across the South Side. All victims connected to the theft. All killings professional, all evidence pointing to the Castellano family as perpetrators seeking revenge. This wasn't justice, Chen told the jury. This was systematic execution. A father and his sons deciding they were above the law, that their code, their honor, mattered more than 15 human lives. Feldman's opening was different, risky, acknowledging what couldn't be denied but reframing it. My clients don't dispute that these 15 people died. They don't dispute that those 15 people stole from Dominic Castellano's warehouse. What we dispute is that this was murder in the legal sense. This was a community policing itself according to codes that predate any statute, codes that say a man protects what's his, that thieves face consequences beyond what courtrooms provide. The Castellanos acted within their world's understanding of justice. Judge Patterson warned him that vigilante justice wasn't a defense under law, but Feldman had planted the seed with the jury, hoping one or two might sympathize enough to hang the verdict. The prosecution's case took 6 weeks. They presented forensic evidence, shell casings, matching guns never found, blood spatter analysis, autopsy reports showing execution-style killings. They presented witnesses, neighbors who'd seen the Castellanos near crime scenes, warehouse workers who testified about Dominic's rage after the theft, fence operators who'd handled the stolen merchandise. Most devastating was Antonio Garcia, the one thief who'd survived, flown back from protective custody to testify. He described the theft, how Luis Moreno had organized it, how 16 people had split $85,000, how he'd run to Houston when bodies started appearing. "Did you know what would happen if Dominic Castellano discovered the theft?" Chen asked. Garcia nodded. "Everyone knew. You steal from the Castellanos, you die. That's been the rule for 30 years. Garcia's testimony lasted 3 days, defense attacking his credibility, pointing out he was testifying to save himself, but the damage was done. The jury heard directly from someone inside the conspiracy, someone who confirmed motive and understood the code. The defense called character witnesses, people who'd known Dominic for decades, who described him as honorable, hardworking, a man who provided jobs when nobody else would. They called cultural experts who explained Sicilian codes of honor, how immigrant communities maintained justice systems parallel to American law. None of it mattered against 15 bodies and Antonio Garcia's testimony. On May 18, 1987, after 19 hours of deliberation over 4 days, the jury returned their verdict. Guilty on all counts, all defendants, 75 murder convictions total, 15 for each Castellano. The courtroom erupted, victims' families crying and embracing, Castellano supporters shouting that it was wrong, that the jury didn't understand, Judge Patterson gaveling for order, threatening to clear the courtroom. The 5 Castellano men showed no emotion, standing straight, accepting what they'd known was coming since that Sunday night in November when the first shots were fired. Sentencing came 3 weeks later, June 8, 1987. Judge Patterson took 2 hours to explain her decision, citing the brutality of the crimes, the premeditation, the complete disregard for human life and law. You gentlemen operated as judge, jury, and executioner. You decided 15 people deserved death for theft, and you carried out those sentences without trial, without mercy, without any consideration for the families you destroyed. This court must send a message that such behavior will not be tolerated in a civilized society, regardless of what codes you claim to follow. Dominic Castellano received 15 consecutive life sentences without possibility of parole. His sons received the same. The mathematics meant each man would die in federal prison, no chance of release, no hope of redemption within the legal system. When asked if he had anything to say before being taken into custody, Dominic stood, looked at the courtroom, spoke clearly. We protected what was ours. In the world where we live, where police don't come and courts don't care, that's what men do. You call it murder. We call it justice. History will judge which of us was right. Judge Patterson responded coldly. History has already judged, Mr. Castellano. You're going to federal prison for the rest of your life. Your sons will never know freedom again. Your family name is destroyed. That's history's judgment. The 5 men were separated immediately, sent to different federal facilities to prevent them from coordinating or maintaining their organization from inside. Dominic went to USP Marion in Illinois, the highest security federal prison in the country. Marco was sent to USP Leavenworth in Kansas. Vincent went to USP Lewisburg in Pennsylvania. Anthony went to USP Atlanta in Georgia. Carlo, the youngest, went to USP Terre Haute in Indiana. Angela Castellano sat in the courtroom gallery watching her husband and 4 sons being led away in shackles, separated from each other, knowing she would spend the rest of her life driving hundreds of miles to different prisons for visiting hours that would never be enough. She was 46 years old, had raised 4 boys to be men, had supported her husband through 30 years of a business that existed in shadows and codes. Now she was alone in a house on 31st Street that felt too big, too quiet, too full of memories that would never be made again. The victims' families had mixed reactions. Some felt vindicated, justice served, the Castellanos punished for their crimes. Others felt empty, knowing that life sentences didn't bring back fathers, brothers, sons, husbands. Patrick Moore's daughter Michelle, now 10 years old, living with her aunt in Evanston, would grow up without her father, regardless of whether the men who killed him rotted in prison or walked free. Carmen Valdez's 3 children would still have nightmares about watching their uncle get shot in their living room. Justice in the legal sense had been achieved, but justice in the human sense, the kind that heals wounds and restores what was lost, remained impossible. Warehouse 7 was seized by federal authorities, sold at auction in August 1987 for $62,000 to a logistics company that had no idea about its history. The new owners cleaned it, painted it, installed new equipment, operated it as a legitimate distribution center for 15 years before it was demolished in 2002 to make way for a residential development. Angela Castellano received none of the proceeds. Everything the family owned seized under RICO statutes, leaving her with nothing but Social Security and the small amount she'd managed to hide before the arrests. She lived modestly, worked part-time at a dry cleaner, visited her husband and sons as often as she could afford the travel, never complained, never spoke publicly about what happened, maintained the dignity that had defined her entire life. Dominic Castellano served 16 years at USP Marion, maximum security, 23 hours a day in his cell, 1 hour for recreation in a concrete yard surrounded by 30-foot walls. He read extensively, philosophy and history, taught other inmates to read, earned respect even among men who'd committed crimes as violent as his own. Prison guards said he never caused trouble, never complained, accepted his sentence with the same stoic acceptance he'd shown in the courtroom. On February 7th, 2003, at age 64, Dominic died of lung cancer in the prison medical facility, alone except for a chaplain he'd never met, buried in the prison cemetery under a simple marker that listed his name and dates, nothing about who he'd been or what he'd done. Marco Castellano remains incarcerated at USP Leavenworth at age 64, serving year 37 of his sentence. He's been denied parole 8 times, most recently in 2023. In a rare interview with a documentary filmmaker in 2019, Marco said only, "I did what my father asked. In our world, That's what sons do. I've had 33 years to think about whether that was right. I still don't have an answer. The interviewer asked if he regretted the killings. Marco looked at the camera, face weathered and old, eyes hard as they'd been in 1986. I regret 15 families lost people they loved, but I don't regret protecting my family's honor. Those two things exist together, and there's no reconciling them. Vincent Castellano was released on parole in 2018 after serving 31 years, his sentence reduced for good behavior and cooperation with prison education programs. He's 62 now, lives in a small apartment in Pittsburgh, works at a library, avoids contact with anyone from his old life. In therapy sessions mandated by his parole, he's discussed the weight he carries, the faces he sees every night, the impossible mathematics of whether protecting $85,000 and a reputation justified 15 deaths. His therapist reports that Vincent struggles with the question Judge Patterson posed at sentencing, where the line is between defending what's yours and becoming the monster you claim to be fighting. Anthony Castellano died in prison in 2009 at age 47, stabbed during a recreation yard fight that had nothing to do with his original crimes, just prison violence that finds everyone eventually. He'd served 22 years, had been scheduled for a parole hearing in 2011 that he would never attend. His body was claimed by Angela Castellano, who buried him in a Catholic cemetery on the south side, the funeral attended by 12 people, mostly elderly relatives who remembered him as a boy before the warehouse and the theft and the November when everything ended. Carlo Castellano, the youngest, served his time at USP Terre Haute, was transferred to a lower security facility in 2005, released on parole in 2012 after 25 years incarcerated. He was 46 years old, had spent his entire adult life in prison, emerged into a world he didn't recognize. Chicago had changed. The South Side gentrifying, warehouse district demolished and rebuilt as condos and coffee shops. Carlo tried to adjust, got work in construction, attended, required counseling, stayed clean. But on August 3rd, 2016, at age 50, he took his own life in a motel room in Gary, Indiana, leaving a note that read, "I can still see their faces every night. 29 years wasn't enough time to make them go away. I'm sorry." The 15 victims' families scattered like leaves after the trial. Maria Moreno, Luis's widow, took her 2 daughters and moved to Phoenix, remarried in 1991, never spoke about what happened. Her daughters are 53 and 51 now. Both have families, both changed their last names, neither discusses their father or how he died. Patrick Moore's daughter Michelle graduated from Northwestern University in 1999, became a social worker helping children in foster care, dedicated her career to kids who lost parents, never forgot the morning she woke to find her father gone. She's 47 now, married, has 3 children she's raised with the intention that they'll never know the violence she witnessed. 41 years have passed since that November in 1986, when Chicago's South Side became a killing field, over $85,000 in stolen merchandise. The warehouse district where it happened no longer exists, demolished in waves of urban renewal that began in the late 90s and continued through the 2000s. Warehouse 7, where Dominic Castellano built his business and planned 15 murders, came down in 2002, replaced by a mixed-use development called Riverside Commons, condominiums and retail space where young professionals live, work, shop, completely unaware of the blood soaked into ground beneath their foundation. The new residents are mostly white, mostly college-educated, attracted by proximity to downtown and relatively affordable housing. They jog past the corner where Dennis Murphy died in an alley, grab coffee at the shop built on ground where Robert Chen was shot on his porch, park their cars in garages constructed over locations where 15 people took their last breaths. None of them know the history. No memorial marks the deaths. No plaque explains what happened here. No historical recognition that this place witnessed one of Chicago's most systematic family eliminations. The city just moved on as cities do, covering scars with new construction until the past becomes invisible. There's no consensus on what the Castellano case means, even now, 4 decades later. Some see it as proof that vigilante justice leads only to destruction, that abandoning law for personal codes creates cycles of violence that destroy everyone involved. The Castellanos ended 15 lives, and in doing so ended their own, spent their remaining years in prison or haunted by what they'd done, achieved nothing except proving that revenge is expensive and hollow. Others, quietly, in conversations that happen in communities where police don't come and courts don't care, acknowledge that the Castellanos operated within a code that still exists, that maybe the 16 thieves knew exactly what they were risking, that in certain worlds, certain violations demand certain responses. Detective Raymond Williams retired from Chicago PD in 2004 after 39 years of service. He died in 2019 at age 76, and in his unpublished memoirs found by his daughter, he wrote about the Castellano case as the one that stayed with him longest. I spent my career believing in law and order, believing the system could deliver justice. The Castellano case showed me the system's limits. Those 15 victims were thieves who'd violated every street code. The Castellanos were murderers who violated every legal code. Both things are true. How do you reconcile that? I never could. The question the case poses remains unanswered and maybe unanswerable. At what point does protecting what's yours transform into becoming worse than those who wronged you? The 16 thieves stole $85,000, a crime that deserved prosecution and punishment within legal frameworks. The 5 Castellanos responded with 15 executions, crimes that shocked even hardened detectives. In defending their honor and business, they destroyed their family, more completely than any theft could have. The recipe for their success, the reputation that took 3 generations to build, died in that November week, buried under bodies and guilt and decades of incarceration. If you drive through the area where Warehouse 7 once stood on a November night when temperature drops to 28 degrees and wind comes off the lake with that particular Chicago bite, you might feel something, not ghosts, nothing supernatural, just the weight of choices made, of codes followed to their terrible conclusions, of violence done in the name of honor that dishonored everyone it touched. Revenge doesn't restore what was stolen. It doesn't heal wounds or rebuild reputations. It only creates new wounds, new families, learning to live with emptiness where people used to be. The Castellano story has no heroes. It has desperate men who valued reputation more than life, thieves who gambled and lost everything, families destroyed on both sides of an equation that never balanced. It has a legal system that delivered convictions, but couldn't deliver healing, couldn't answer the fundamental questions about justice and honor, and what we're willing to become to protect what we love. In the end, one question remains, one each of us must answer for ourselves. Where is the line between defending what's yours and losing your humanity in the process? Because Dominic Castellano crossed that line in November 1986, took his 4 sons with him, and what they found on the other side was 41 years of prison, death, suicide, and regret that no amount of honor could erase. If this story made you think about justice, family loyalty, and the price we pay when codes collide with law, leave your like and subscribe to the channel for more true stories that challenge our understanding of right and wrong. Comment below. Where do you draw the line between protecting what's yours and becoming the thing you fear? What would you have done in Dominic Castellano's position, knowing that calling police wouldn't recover the merchandise and wouldn't restore your reputation in a world where reputation is survival? These stories aren't just history. They're happening right now somewhere. Different cities, different circumstances, same fundamental questions about what we're willing to do when systems fail and desperation takes hold. Until next time, remember, the monsters we fear aren't always born that way. Sometimes they're made. One stolen shipment, one broken code, one desperate decision at a time. And the line between justice and vengeance is drawn not in courtrooms, but in the human heart, where it's always been thinnest, always been easiest to cross, always been hardest to find our way back from.